The light on the soundstage was soft and pale, the kind that made everything feel a little slower, a little quieter, as if the day was still deciding what it wanted to be. A faint hum from the equipment sat in the background like distant traffic, steady and low. Keanu stood just off his mark, holding his breath for a second without knowing why, his eyes resting on the floor where a thin line of tape waited for him. There was no rush in the air, no loud voices, yet he felt a small tightness in his chest that did not match the calm around him. It felt like the room was gently asking him a question he did not know how to answer. He shifted his weight, and for a moment he thought he could hear his own heartbeat louder than the crew moving in the shadows. The director called for a quick rehearsal, and the crew adjusted lights and camera angles with quiet focus. People who had done this for years moved with easy confidence. They knew where to stand, how to speak, when to joke, and when to go silent. Keanu nodded when someone asked if he was ready. His voice sounded polite and steady as usual, yet inside there was a faint distance, as if the words belonged to someone standing a few steps away. He walked to his mark, felt the tape under his shoes, looked up at the empty space where his scene partner would be framed, and tried to feel what he was supposed to feel. The script said that his character was tired but hopeful, slowly rediscovering his reason to keep going. It was strange because the moment he searched for that feeling, he realized he could not find it, not in the way he remembered. The first take began. The camera moved. Lights warmed his skin. His lines flowed out, smooth and clear, his timing precise from years of practice. He did everything right, every pause, every look, every small motion of his hands. When the director said cut, there were a few approving nods. Someone near the monitor said that it looked good. But there was no laughter, no small cheer, only a quiet that felt heavier than before. Keanu turned his head toward the screen where the scene replayed, and for a moment his own face stared back in close-up. The man on the monitor had gentle eyes and calm features, but there was something missing in his gaze, something he could not name. He watched himself speak, watched his mouth form the words, and felt almost like a visitor watching a stranger. That feeling stayed with him as the day moved forward. He went through the motions that everyone expected: wardrobe tweaks, a short conversation about the next scene, a polite smile for a background actor who told him they were honored to work with him. He listened, he thanked them, he tried to be present and respectful because kindness had always felt natural to him. Yet under each moment there was a quiet echo, like a question bouncing off the walls of his chest. When did he last feel truly happy? Not just satisfied, not just grateful, but simple, childlike joy. He tried to summon an image and instead found a blank space, as if a part of his memory had faded at the edges. He knew he had reasons to be thankful. He knew he had moments that others would call special, yet his heart felt as if it had slowly stepped away from its own light. In a rare pause between setups, he slipped away to the side of the stage where a tall metal staircase led up to a shadowed balcony above the lights. He climbed without really thinking about it, each step soft under his boots, the sounds of the set growing smaller as he moved higher. When he reached the top, he stopped and watched the world below. From there, the crew looked like a careful pattern, people crossing paths, rolling carts, checking equipment. It reminded him of how many years he had spent in spaces like this, how many times he had stood under bright lights, how many stories he had helped bring to life. He knew he was lucky. He knew many would trade everything for his place. Yet a simple thought rose inside him, quiet and honest. If he stepped away from all this for a while, he did not know where he would go or what he would do that would make him feel alive. He heard footsteps behind him, soft but familiar. Sandra had always had a way of walking that did not demand attention, yet somehow drew it. She stopped a short distance away from him, not too close, giving him space in a way that felt respectful and kind. For a moment they both looked down at the set in silence. The air between them carried no pressure, only a gentle awareness. She did not ask him what he was doing up there. She did not joke to lighten the mood. Instead, she simply said that the rehearsal looked interesting and that the director seemed happy with his work. He nodded and said that it was fine, that everything was fine. The words sounded correct but thin, like a sentence written on fading paper. Sandra turned her head slightly and studied his face, not in a way that felt intrusive, but in the way a true friend notices what others ignore. There was a small change in her expression, barely visible yet full of meaning. It was as if she had felt the gap between his words and his truth. She told him that sometimes a scene looks perfect on the monitor but feels wrong inside, and that when that happens she pays more attention to the feeling than to the playback. Her voice was gentle, not preaching, not demanding. Keanu listened, his eyes still on the people below, and something inside him shifted. It was a strange sensation, like realizing that you have been holding your breath without knowing it. Yet even in that moment, he did not know how to answer her honestly. How could he explain a feeling he barely understood? How could he put into simple words the sense that his life was full and empty at the same time? The assistant director called everyone back to the main set. The next scene was ready. Sandra gave him a soft look, as if to say that the conversation was not over, only paused. She walked down the stairs first, leaving him a path to follow. Keanu remained at the top step for a few extra seconds, his hand resting on the cool rail, his eyes drifting once more to the glowing monitor below. He watched another replay of his own face, caught between calm and something hollow. Something silent inside him admitted that he did not recognize the man in that image anymore, not fully. He knew his own features, his own voice, his own body language, yet he could not find the spark that once made all of this feel like a gift instead of a duty. As he finally began to descend, a quiet thought moved through his mind, clear and unsettling. He realized that he could list the things he was responsible for, he could list the people he wanted to protect, the promises he wanted to keep, the causes he wanted to support. But if someone asked him what made him truly happy now, not years ago, not in some vague, distant past, he would have no answer. The thought stayed with him like a soft ache as he stepped back under the lights, as the crew turned toward him, as the director raised a hand to call for action. Sandra watched him from her position, and while no one else noticed, she could see that something in his eyes had changed, as if a door had opened inside him and he was suddenly aware of the empty room behind it, a room that once held joy. He took his place, the scene began again, and the cameras rolled. Yet even as he said his lines, even as he moved with practiced ease, one question repeated quietly in the back of his mind, steady and insistent, and he knew that sooner or later he would have to face it. What had he lost along the way, and why could he no longer remember the last time he felt simply and completely happy? He did not know that this silent question that now would not leave him alone was the first small step toward a change he could not yet imagine. The afternoon passed in a blur that felt both full and empty, like a room crowded with furniture but missing its windows. Each scene was carefully lit, each camera movement planned, each moment checked and replayed on the monitor. People moved around Keanu with intention, asking him small questions, adjusting his collar, touching up his hair. He answered politely, thanked them, lifted the corners of his mouth when someone made a light joke. Yet as he stood under the bright lights, he felt as if a thin glass wall had slid between him and the rest of the world, clear enough that he could see everything, but solid enough that nothing could quite reach him. When they set up for a lighter scene later in the day, the director explained that this was the turning point for his character, the moment when a little warmth returned after a long stretch of sadness. He listened carefully and nodded because the direction made sense. The script was good. The arc was clear. In theory, this should have been the kind of scene he enjoyed, a soft shift, a gentle opening of the heart. But when the camera rolled and he tried to let that feeling in, he found himself reaching for something that was not there. He shaped the expression, he softened his voice, he let his eyes brighten in the way he knew the scene needed. Everyone watching seemed satisfied, yet inside it felt like he was painting sunlight on a wall while standing in the dark. Between takes, Sandra watched him more than she watched the monitor. She had known him for many years through different projects and different seasons of life. She had seen him tired, she had seen him quiet, she had seen him carry grief with quiet dignity. This felt different. This was not simple exhaustion from long hours or the weight of a tough role. This looked like someone who had misplaced something essential and was still trying to function without it. When the director praised the last take for its honesty, she glanced at Keanu and saw a brief flicker in his eyes that did not match the compliment. A flicker of almost confusion, as if he could not see what they were seeing. Then something small happened that nobody else noticed. During a reset, a member of the crew sat down at a piano that had been brought in for a later scene. The person began to play a simple melody, slow and gentle, the kind of tune that does not demand attention but quietly changes the air in the room. The sound curled through the space, softening the edges of the set. Keanu turned his head toward it without thinking. For a brief second, his face shifted, his eyes growing distant in a different way. There was a spark of recognition, not of the song itself, but of a feeling it almost reached. He felt a memory push against the surface of his mind, something from another time when music meant late nights with friends and laughter and no schedule, when joy had arrived without invitation. Before he could follow that feeling, the assistant director called everyone back into position. The melody stopped. The crew member left the piano and returned to their task. The air snapped back to its usual rhythm. Keanu walked to his mark again, but the small moment stayed with him, like a nearly remembered dream that fades when you open your eyes. He delivered the next take, said the right lines, moved in the right way. Yet the unfinished memory buzzed quietly in his chest, and with it came a new awareness that unsettled him. Whenever something tried to awaken his joy, he turned away without knowing why, as if he was afraid of what it might show him. Later, during a short break, he stepped away from the main set into a narrower hallway where the light fell in thin strips through high windows. The noise of the crew faded to a soft murmur. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and took a slow breath, hoping the quiet would steady him. Instead, the silence made his thoughts louder. He realized that he could not remember the last time he had chosen to do something just because it made him happy. Not for work, not for anyone else, not because it was expected, but for himself. He knew he had enjoyed things in the past: writing, reading, small shared meals, quiet moments watching the city from a balcony. Yet they all felt far away, as if they belonged to another person who happened to share his name. A gentle voice broke through his thoughts. Sandra had followed him, but she stayed a few steps away, not crowding him. She said she had been looking for a quiet corner too, that the set was getting a bit loud for her. Her words were simple, but he could hear the layer under them and offer to be there without demanding an explanation. They stood in that soft light for a moment, side by side, facing the same empty stretch of hallway. She told him that she had been through seasons where everything felt distant, where even good things seemed to pass by like scenes from a film she was only watching. She said that during those times, she kept working, kept showing up, kept being professional, but inside she felt like a copy of herself, slightly thinner than the original. Keanu turned his head a little, surprised by her openness. She did not frame it as advice. She did not tell him what he should do. She did not insist that she understood exactly what he felt. She simply shared a small piece of her own experience and let it rest between them. He appreciated that more than he knew how to say. He replied that he was fine, that he was just a little tired, that the project was intense. The words sounded reasonable. Most people would have accepted them and changed the subject. Sandra did not push, but she also did not fully accept the answer. She said that she believed him about the tired part, but that his eyes were telling a slightly different story. There was no sharp edge in her tone, only a quiet respect for the truth. Before their conversation could go deeper, another call came from the main stage. They were needed back. Sandra gave him one more look, a small, thoughtful glance that said she saw more than he was saying and that she was not going to forget it. As they walked back together, she made a light comment about the piano, saying that the little improvised song had been beautiful and that it changed the mood of the whole room. Keanu agreed, but his voice was soft, and she noticed that he did not add anything more. In her mind, a small idea began to take shape, not a plan with clear steps yet, but a sense that she might need to gently guide him toward whatever he had lost. The day stretched into evening, then into night, as long shoot days often did. Scenes were completed, equipment was shifted, people gradually drifted out as their work finished. By the time they wrapped, the set felt like a tired organism slowly going to sleep. Outside, the sky was dark and the air cooler. Sandra found Keanu near the trailers, his shoulders slightly slumped, his hands resting in his pockets as if he did not quite know what to do next. She walked up to him and asked if he had plans after set. He said that he would probably just go home, maybe make something simple to eat, maybe read, maybe not. His voice sounded uncertain, as if he was listing ideas without any real desire behind them. She paused for a second, then said that there was a small place not too far from the studio, a quiet spot she sometimes visited when her mind felt too noisy. It was not a fancy restaurant or a crowded public space, just a little late-night cafe with simple food and a corner where you could sit without being bothered. She added that they did not have to talk about anything serious, that they could just sit, share a meal, and rest for a bit as two people, not as characters, not as coworkers. Her offer was wrapped in kindness, with no pressure, no guilt attached. If he wanted to say no, she would accept it. For a moment he hesitated. A part of him wanted to retreat to his familiar quiet, to the safe pattern of going home alone and letting the hours pass. Another part, smaller but growing, sensed that the numbness inside him was not going to fade by itself. He looked at her, saw the sincerity in her eyes, the absence of judgment, the way she was clearly offering time and presence because she cared, not because she was curious. He nodded and said that a quiet place sounded nice. She smiled, not with victory, but with gentle relief, as if a small door that needed to open had just done so. They drove in separate cars, following each other through the city streets. The traffic was light, the buildings far less demanding without the harsh light of day. As he trailed behind her car, Keanu felt something unfamiliar, a thin thread of anticipation. He did not know what they would talk about. He did not know if he would be able to put his feelings into words, but there was comfort in the fact that he would not be alone with his thoughts for a while. When they turned into a quieter part of the city, lined with older buildings and softer streetlights, he realized that he had not been in this area for a long time, maybe years. They parked near a corner where a small cafe sat with its warm interior light spilling out onto the sidewalk. There were a few people inside, seated in quiet clusters, their voices low. From the outside, it looked like a place that did not ask for attention but welcomed it if it arrived. Sandra stepped out of her car and waited for him, her posture relaxed, as if this was the most natural way to end a long day. As he walked toward her, he felt a faint tug of something in his chest, like the first distant note of a melody he used to know. He could not name it yet, but it was different from the dull emptiness he had grown used to carrying. They walked to the door together, and he reached out to open it. At that exact moment, something caught his eye through the glass, a small detail inside the cafe that made him stop for half a second. His hand still on the handle, his heart giving a quiet, unexpected jump, as if it recognized something his mind had not yet processed. He did not understand why that simple sight unsettled him in a new way, only that the feeling was strong enough to make his breath change. He pushed the door open, stepping into the gentle warmth of the cafe, not knowing that this small choice was the first step toward a much larger shift, one that would soon lead him to a place he never expected to revisit, a place where the truth about his happiness would no longer let itself be ignored. The gentle warmth of the cafe felt different once they stepped inside, almost as if the air carried a soft awareness of their arrival. The lights were dim but steady, the kind that made shadows feel calm instead of heavy. Soft music played from a small speaker near the counter, a slow piano tune that wrapped the room in a quiet embrace. Keanu glanced around, and for a moment his breath caught again, that strange feeling from the doorway returning with a little more strength. He could not explain it yet, but something in this place tugged at him like a thread he had forgotten he once held. Sandra chose a corner table near a window where the glow of the streetlights touched the glass in a soft haze. She waited for him to sit, giving him space to settle without rushing. When he sank into the chair, he felt a subtle tension leave his shoulders as if the seat itself was encouraging him to pause. The server approached with a polite smile, and they ordered simple things, warm drinks and light food. There was no urgency in the atmosphere, no expectation to fill the silence, yet the silence felt full, like it was gently pushing him toward something he was not ready to face. As they waited, Sandra watched him with quiet curiosity. She noticed how his eyes drifted around the room as if searching for something familiar. She noticed the way his fingers tapped softly on the table, a small restless motion that did not match the peaceful environment. She asked if he had been here before. Her voice was soft, free of pressure. Keanu hesitated, looked toward the back corner of the cafe where a framed photograph hung on the wall, and felt that same strange tug again. He said he could not remember. The answer was honest yet incomplete. The food arrived, warm and simple, and they ate with easy conversation, talking about work, the long day, the way the camera crew kept finding new places to hide microphones. Sandra made light comments that drew small smiles from him. For a little while, he felt almost normal, almost present. But beneath their quiet laughter, he kept feeling an odd awareness in the room, a sense that something was waiting for him to notice it. Each time he looked up, his eyes drifted back to that framed photograph without knowing why. The moment he finally truly looked at it, something shifted inside him. The picture showed an old motorcycle shop. The sign faded, the door slightly open, a faint blur of a man working inside. It was not a picture of him, not a picture taken for him, yet he felt a deep pull toward it, as if it reminded him of a chapter of his life he had placed in a locked drawer. His breath slowed. His chest tightened in a way that felt strangely familiar and strangely painful. Sandra noticed the change immediately. She turned her head to the photograph, then back to him. She asked if the place meant something to him. He lowered his gaze, unsure how to respond. He said he once spent time in a place like that many years ago when film schedules were lighter and weekends felt long enough to belong to him. He said it had been a small workshop where he used to help fix old bikes, not professionally, just because it made him feel peaceful. As he spoke, Sandra saw a softness grow in his voice, the first hint of genuine warmth she had heard from him that day. Then something unexpected happened. A man from a nearby table looked over and asked if they were talking about the old mechanic who used to work by the coast. Sandra and Keanu turned toward him, surprised. The man explained that the workshop in the photograph belonged to a quiet elder who was known for fixing vintage bikes and for never charging more than he needed. He said the shop had closed some years ago because the mechanic had fallen ill. As he continued speaking, Keanu felt a sharp ache rise inside him, unexpected and heavy. He remembered the place now, not just vaguely but clearly. The feeling of oil on his hands, the sound of tools on metal, the simple joy of working on something real with no scripts and no spotlights. The man added that the old mechanic still lived near the coast, but rarely left his home now. That piece of information struck Keanu in a deeper place. He had not thought of the mechanic in so long that guilt brushed against his heart. He remembered afternoons spent learning, laughing softly, adjusting engines while sunlight came through the dusty windows. He remembered how the mechanic had called him kid even though he was already an adult. He remembered how free he felt there, how present, how whole. Sandra heard the quiet breathing change beside her and understood that something important had surfaced. She did not interrupt. She let the weight of the moment sit with him. After a few long seconds, Keanu whispered that he used to love going there, that it was one of the few places where he felt like himself without trying. He said he had stopped visiting when work became busier, and then the years passed faster than he realized. His voice grew softer when he added that maybe he had forgotten too much of who he used to be. The cafe door opened with a soft ring and a cold breeze crept in, brushing lightly across the room. For a moment the sound of the piano shifted to a new melody, a slightly stronger one, and Keanu felt something stir inside him again, an echo of a memory pushing upward. Sandra watched his eyes and could almost see the pieces moving behind them. She asked if he wanted to see the place again someday. Her tone was gentle, respectful, offering without insisting. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the photograph once more, the blurry figure inside the workshop, the sunlight on the door, the familiar shape of the tools on the wall. Something inside him whispered that going back might show him something he needed to see. Another part whispered that it might hurt to face how much time had passed. He felt caught between the two, uncertain which voice to trust. Before he could speak, the server approached and placed the bill on the table. The moment broke the tension but did not dissolve it. They stood to leave, and as they stepped toward the door, he felt that same strange tug again, stronger now, almost guiding. Outside, the night air felt clearer, sharper, as if it had been waiting for them. Sandra locked her car and leaned against the door for a moment, watching him with the kind of patience only real friends offer. She asked if he was all right. He nodded, but this time the answer held a different weight. He said he was not sure, but something in him had started moving, something that had been still for too long. She smiled softly and told him that movement was good, even if it was small. They stood under the streetlight in quiet understanding. The city hummed around them, soft and distant. Keanu looked down the street, then back at her. He said that he wanted to know if the mechanic was still there, still alive, still holding on to that little piece of the world that once felt like home. Sandra nodded and said they could find out, that they could go if he felt ready. He did not expect the relief that washed through him at her words. They parted ways for the night, but as Keanu drove home, the streets felt different. The silence in his car felt less heavy. The thought of the workshop lingered in his mind, no longer distant, no longer blurred. He felt a pull toward it, gentle but steady, like a forgotten melody that had finally found its way back to his memory. When he reached a quiet intersection, he stopped at the red light and looked out of his window. For a moment he imagined the old coastal road, the dust on the windows of the workshop, the sound of the mechanic calling him kid. He felt his chest tighten with a mix of fear and hope. The light turned green, but he did not move immediately. He whispered to himself that maybe it was time to go back, even if he did not know what he would find there. The night around him grew quietly suspenseful, as if the world itself was waiting for his next step. The night felt heavier when he reached home, not in a dark way, but in a way that made the silence feel almost alive. He placed his keys on the small table near the door and stood still for a moment, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of his own breathing. The quiet used to comfort him, yet tonight it made him feel exposed, as if the thoughts he had kept pushed down were finally rising to the surface. He walked to the window and looked at the city lights below, each one steady and unmoving, each one reminding him how long he had been drifting without noticing. He tried to read for a while, holding a familiar book in his hands, but the words refused to stay in place. Every few seconds his mind drifted back to the photograph in the cafe, the blurred figure inside the workshop, the memory of oil on his hands, and the quiet joy he used to feel while fixing old engines. He remembered the laughter of the mechanic, the warmth in his voice, the way the place had felt like a small world where time slowed down and everything made sense. He did not know why he had stopped going. He only knew he had let the years pass without looking back. Sleep came slowly in pieces. When he finally drifted off, he dreamed of the workshop, but it looked different. The lights flickered, the tools hung in strange places, and the mechanic stood half hidden in shadow. Keanu reached toward him, but his feet felt heavy, as if he was walking through thick sand. When he finally got close enough to speak, the old man smiled the same gentle smile he remembered, but the room behind him was empty. Keanu woke up with a soft gasp, his heart beating too fast for a dream so quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed with his hands covering his face. Something in him whispered that he could not ignore this anymore. The mechanic had been one of the few people who treated him not as an actor, not as a public figure, but as a person who loved engines and quiet afternoons and learning something new with his hands. Losing that connection had taken something from him, even if he had not seen it happen. Maybe this was why his smiles no longer felt real. Maybe this was why he felt hollow beneath the surface. The next morning on set, he arrived earlier than usual. The crew was still preparing equipment, and the sun was just beginning to slip through the high windows. Sandra was already there, sitting on a folding chair with a warm drink in her hands. When she saw him, she gave him a gentle nod, a greeting that felt more like understanding than small talk. He walked toward her and took a slow breath before speaking. He told her that he remembered the workshop, that he remembered how it felt to be there, how peaceful it had been. He said he did not know why he had left that part of himself behind. Sandra listened carefully, her expression soft but focused. She said that sometimes life moves faster than we expect, and we do not notice what we lose until something reminds us to look back. She did not ask him to explain further. She simply asked if he wanted to find the mechanic. The question settled between them with surprising weight. He hesitated, not because he doubted the idea, but because he feared what he might find. What if the mechanic did not remember him? What if the shop no longer existed? What if the place he remembered with warmth now felt empty or changed? But another part of him felt a pull stronger than fear. He nodded and said that he wanted to go, that he needed to know the truth, whatever it was. They had a short window in their schedule, a rare afternoon with no scenes for them. Sandra suggested they drive together since the coast was not far. He agreed. They left the studio after a few hours, slipping into the soft light of early afternoon. The drive began quietly, with the hum of the engine and the passing scenery doing most of the talking. Sandra allowed the silence, letting him think, letting him breathe. She understood that the journey mattered just as much as the destination. As the city gave way to wider roads and open sky, Keanu felt an odd mixture of calm and tension. He watched fields pass by, watched the horizon grow taller, watched the coastline appear in the distance like a memory taking shape. Each mile felt like a step backward and forward at the same time, a strange blend of fear and steady hope. Sandra glanced at him once in a while, checking his breathing, his posture, the way his hands tightened slightly on his knees. When they finally reached the small coastal town, the air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of salt and old wood. The streets were quiet, lined with weathered buildings and small shops that seemed to have lived many stories of their own. Sandra parked near a narrow alley that led to the workshop. Keanu stepped out of the car slowly, feeling the ground beneath his feet with careful attention. The moment felt heavier than he expected, as if the town itself held its breath for him. They walked side by side toward the old workshop. Each step felt slower than the last. As they turned the final corner, Keanu stopped. The workshop was still there, but it looked older, the paint more faded, the windows covered with dust. The door was closed, but a thin line of light slipped through the gap at the bottom. He felt his pulse rise. For a moment, he could not move. Sandra placed a gentle hand on his arm, grounding him without pushing. He approached the door and lifted his hand to knock. His fingers hovered in the air, trembling slightly. He closed his eyes for one breath, then knocked softly. The sound echoed in a way that made his heart tighten. A few moments passed, then footsteps approached from inside. The door creaked open. The mechanic stood there, older than he remembered, his hair thinner, his posture slightly bent. Yet his eyes held the same warm brightness Keanu had never forgotten. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The mechanic looked at him with a gaze that shifted from curiosity to recognition. Then a gentle smile spread across his face as he said a single word that carried years of memory. Kid. The sound of that word broke something open inside Keanu. He felt a warmth rush through him, a mixture of relief and sorrow and gratitude. He greeted the old man with a voice that wavered despite his effort to hide it. The mechanic welcomed them inside, nodding at Sandra with polite warmth. She smiled back and followed, staying close but giving space where needed. The workshop looked both familiar and new. The tools were still on the walls, though some were rusted. The workbench was still cluttered with parts, though the dust was thicker. The air smelled of old wood and faint oil. Keanu stepped in slowly, taking in every detail, feeling memories press against him from every direction. The mechanic watched him with patient eyes, understanding more than Keanu could ever explain. They talked for a while. The mechanic asked where he had been, how life had treated him. Keanu answered honestly, sharing that he had been busy, that work had taken over, that he had forgotten how much this place once meant to him. The mechanic nodded and said that sometimes the world asks for too much and leaves too little time for the soul. Then came the twist he did not expect. The mechanic told him that the workshop was closing for good soon. His health made it difficult to keep up with repairs. He said he had been waiting for someone to take care of a bike they had once worked on together, a bike Keanu had helped rebuild but never got to finish. The mechanic led them to the back of the workshop, where a dusty sheet covered an old motorcycle frame. When Keanu pulled the sheet away, he froze. The bike looked exactly as he remembered it, unfinished but full of potential. Seeing it again made something inside him break open with painful clarity. He realized he had not just forgotten a place or a person. He had forgotten a version of himself, someone who felt joy in creation, someone who found peace in simple work, someone who laughed easily without needing a reason. Sandra watched him silently, her eyes soft with understanding. She saw the weight lift from him piece by piece as he reached out and touched the metal frame. The mechanic placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder and said that this bike had been waiting for him. The words landed gently, filling the room with emotion. Keanu felt his voice tremble as he whispered that he wanted to finish it. The mechanic nodded with a small, proud smile. Sandra stepped closer and told him she believed he needed this, that sometimes the heart remembers itself through the things our hands once loved to do. Keanu looked at the unfinished motorcycle once more, and for the first time in a very long while he felt something warm rise inside his chest. Not guilt, not exhaustion, not emptiness. Hope. The air inside the workshop felt different now, as if the dust and quiet had shifted into something softer, almost alive. Keanu stood in front of the unfinished motorcycle, his fingers resting lightly on the cold metal. The touch stirred something deep inside him, not a sharp burst of feeling, but a slow awakening, like warm light spreading through a room that had been dark for too long. He let his hand stay there, steady and gentle, until his breath found a calmer rhythm. Sandra watched from a few steps away, her expression warm and patient, giving him the space to feel without rushing him. The mechanic moved slowly around the workbench, picking up a few tools with hands that trembled just slightly. He placed them near the motorcycle and told Keanu that the engine still needed attention, that some parts had aged, that others were waiting to be aligned. Keanu listened carefully, nodding in silence, feeling a quiet responsibility return to him. He asked if the mechanic wanted him to work on it now. The old man smiled, small and genuine, and said that the bike had been waiting long enough. Keanu took a slow breath and reached for a wrench. The moment he wrapped his hand around it, something inside him clicked into place. The weight felt familiar. The cool metal pressed against his palm in a way that made memories rise through him like gentle waves. He knelt beside the motorcycle, and for the first time in a long time he was not an actor on a set, not a public figure under scrutiny, not a man performing emotions he could not fully feel. He was simply someone fixing something with his hands, someone who found peace in small tasks and steady motions. As he worked, the mechanic and Sandra watched in soft silence. The old man occasionally offered a quiet instruction, his voice carrying both experience and affection. Sandra stood near the corner, her eyes following each careful movement Keanu made. She could see the tension leaving his shoulders, see the way his breath deepened, see the subtle shift in his expression that revealed something she had not seen in a long time. He was present in a way he had not been earlier, grounded in the moment, listening to the gentle music of tools and metal instead of the noise in his own mind. The afternoon light filtered through the dusty windows, falling across the workshop in soft lines. The warmth of it touched Keanu's face as he leaned closer to tighten a bolt. For a moment he paused, closing his eyes as a faint smile shaped itself, small but real. Sandra saw it and felt her own chest loosen with quiet relief. She had hoped this place would reach him, but she had not expected the shift to be so visible, so sincere. After a while, the mechanic suggested taking a break. He set out 3 small cups and poured tea that smelled faintly of mint and old wood. They sat together on worn stools, the 3 of them forming a small circle of quiet companionship. Keanu cupped the warm tea in his hands and let the heat sink into his fingers. He felt lighter, not fully free of the heaviness he had carried, but gentler inside, as if something had softened. The mechanic asked him how life had been. Keanu hesitated before answering, unsure how to put such a complicated truth into simple words. He finally said that he had been moving so fast for so long that he forgot how to stand still. The mechanic nodded, his eyes holding understanding shaped by many years. He said that the world often praises movement but rarely teaches rest, and that forgetting joy often begins quietly in the spaces between responsibilities. Sandra sipped her tea and added that sometimes people forget themselves because they spend too much time trying to be what others need. She said it softly, without looking at Keanu directly, but her words carried a gentle truth that reached him anyway. He lowered his gaze, touched by her insight, grateful in a way he could not express. After their break, Keanu returned to the bike, his hands steadier now. Each movement felt purposeful. Each sound of metal against metal felt like a small piece of clarity falling into place. At one point, he tightened a bolt and paused, catching a faint reflection of himself on the side of the engine. He stared at it quietly. The face he saw was tired, but there was something new in the eyes, something returning, something rediscovered. He touched the reflection with the tip of his finger and felt tears rise unexpectedly, warm and gentle, not from sadness but from recognition. When he stepped back, the mechanic placed a hand on his shoulder in a way that felt both grounding and heartfelt. He told Keanu that he had always known he would come back one day. He said that some places remain open inside us, even when we close the door without realizing it. Keanu's throat tightened as he nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle deeply within him. Then came the twist, subtle but powerful. As Keanu checked one of the parts on the side table, he noticed a small box pushed against the back edge. He asked the mechanic about it. The old man hesitated, looked at Sandra, then looked back at Keanu with a thoughtful expression. He said that the box contained parts Keanu had once chosen years ago, insisting that they would finish the bike together someday. The mechanic had kept them untouched all this time, hoping that Keanu might return. Keanu lifted the box carefully and opened it. Inside were pieces he remembered picking out, pieces he had once handled with excitement and purpose. His breath caught as he realized how long it had been since he felt anything close to that excitement. His fingers brushed the parts gently, and for a moment he felt young again, filled with the quiet joy he had lost somewhere along the way. Sandra stepped closer, her voice soft as she told him that this was not just a project, it was a part of him he had left behind. She said he had the right to reclaim it. He looked at her, his eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, something that felt like awakening. He realized she had not brought him here to fix a bike. She had brought him here to find himself. The hours passed slowly and beautifully. The workshop filled with small sounds of repair, gentle conversations, and moments of silence that felt full instead of empty. Keanu worked with care, his movements guided by memory and the mechanic's steady voice. Each step made him feel more whole, more present, more connected to a version of himself he thought he had lost forever. As the sun began to set, the workshop glowed with warm light. Keanu stepped back from the bike, breathing deeply. It was not finished yet, but the progress was clear. The shape of the machine felt alive again. It felt possible. The mechanic nodded with approval, saying they were on the right path. Sandra's smile grew, soft and proud, seeing how much had changed in such a short time. Then the mechanic spoke again, his voice carrying a gentle seriousness. He told Keanu that finishing the bike was important, but not because of the machine. It was important because it reminded him of who he was when he felt joy, when he allowed himself to be human instead of a symbol. He said that the world needed his strength, but it also needed his happiness. Keanu felt tears gather again, but this time he did not look away. He let the emotion wash through him, warm and freeing. He looked at Sandra, and she nodded as if to say she understood every unspoken word. When they stepped outside, the sky was turning deep blue, touched by the last traces of sunlight. The air was cool and fresh. Keanu breathed it in slowly, feeling lighter than he had in years. Sandra walked beside him, quiet but close, giving him support without speaking. As they reached the car, he paused. His heart felt full, yet he sensed something deeper waiting just beyond the horizon. He knew he was not done. Something inside him had opened, and now he had to follow where it led. The workshop had given him a glimpse of his joy, but he knew there was more he needed to face, more he needed to rediscover, more he needed to understand. He turned to Sandra and whispered that coming here was only the beginning. And he was right. The next morning arrived with a softer light than usual, the kind that made the world look gentle even before anyone was fully awake. Keanu opened his eyes slowly, feeling a calm he had not felt in months, maybe years. The memories of the workshop, the mechanic, the unfinished motorcycle, and the quiet warmth in Sandra's eyes all drifted through him like morning sunlight spreading across a quiet room. He lay still for a moment, letting the calm settle deeper, letting himself breathe without rushing. Yet beneath that calm, something new stirred. Not fear, not tension, but a steady pull, as if the world was nudging him toward a truth he still needed to face. The workshop had opened a door inside him, but he sensed there was another one waiting. He sat up slowly and let his feet touch the floor, grounding himself in the simple act of standing. On set, the mood was lighter than usual. People joked more, the director hummed a tune while checking the camera, and Sandra greeted him with a soft smile that held quiet pride. When he returned the smile, it felt real in a way he could feel in his chest, a warmth that reached all the way to his breath. She walked beside him as they prepared for the day's scenes, her presence steady and kind. Between rehearsals, she asked how he felt. He paused before answering, looking at the bright shapes of the lights above them. He said he felt like he had found a small part of himself again, but that something still felt unfinished. Sandra nodded as if she had been expecting that. She told him that rediscovery often happens in steps, not all at once, and that sometimes the final step is the hardest because it asks us to accept something about ourselves that we have been avoiding. Her words lingered in his mind through the morning, weaving themselves into the quiet spaces between each take. He performed well, more naturally than he had in weeks, even months. The director noticed the shift, the easy sincerity in his expressions, the gentle clarity in his presence. But Keanu knew that something inside him was still waiting for closure, something he needed before he could feel whole again. They wrapped early that afternoon. Sandra approached him before he could leave the set. She placed a hand on his arm and asked if he wanted to go back to the workshop. He hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Something told him that today mattered, that this visit would not be like the last one. He followed her to the car, feeling the familiar mixture of nervousness and hope. The drive felt shorter this time. The road stretched ahead with a kind of quiet invitation, the coast drawing closer with each mile. When they reached the little town, the air carried the same gentle scent of salt and wood, but today it felt like the town itself was watching, waiting. The mechanic was sitting outside the workshop when they arrived, resting on a wooden stool, warming his hands in the sunlight. He smiled when he saw them, a slow smile that held decades of kindness. Keanu walked toward him, feeling a tightness in his throat that he did not try to hide. The mechanic greeted him as if no time had passed at all. They went inside together. The motorcycle stood exactly where they had left it, the metal catching the afternoon light in a way that made it look almost alive. Keanu approached it with steady steps, running his hand along the handlebars, feeling the smoothness of the metal under his fingertips. He took a slow breath and asked the mechanic if they could finish it today. The old man nodded with a quiet certainty. Sandra watched from the side, her hands folded gently, her eyes attentive and warm. Keanu picked up the next tool, feeling its weight settle into his palm, and continued the work he had once abandoned. The mechanic guided him with soft instructions, but mostly he let Keanu lead, letting him reclaim the space with each careful motion. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. The world outside faded. The workshop held them in a warm cocoon of focus, memory, and healing. When Keanu tightened the last bolt and stepped back, the motorcycle stood whole for the first time in years. Complete, steady, beautiful. The mechanic placed a hand on Keanu's back, pride glowing in his tired eyes. He said that the bike was not just a machine, it was a reflection of a promise Keanu had made to himself long ago. He said that finishing it meant he had remembered something his heart had been trying to tell him. Keanu swallowed hard, tears filling his eyes. He looked at Sandra, who stepped closer with a soft smile. She told him that the joy he felt in this workshop was not lost, it had only been waiting for him to return. She said that sometimes we forget the things that keep our hearts alive, and sometimes we need someone who truly sees us to guide us back. Keanu felt his breath tremble. He thanked the mechanic for keeping the bike safe, for keeping a piece of him safe. He thanked Sandra for bringing him here, for noticing what he had been hiding, for walking with him when he could not walk alone. The mechanic handed him the keys and said that the bike belonged to him now, that it always had. Keanu closed his fingers around the keys, feeling a deep sense of completion settle into his chest. As evening approached, they stepped outside. The sky was painted with soft colors, a quiet glow that felt like a blessing. Keanu looked at the workshop, then at Sandra, then at the keys in his hand. He understood something with full clarity. He had not just remembered what made him happy. He had remembered that he was allowed to be happy. He turned to Sandra and said that her kindness had saved him from forgetting himself completely. She shook her head gently and told him he had done the hard part himself. She said she had only reminded him of the door he had already been standing in front of. They stood there in the warm evening air, the mechanic smiling from the doorway, the world soft around them. Keanu felt peace settle into him like a long, overdue breath. And as they walked back to the car, he knew the truth that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes happiness is not something we chase. Sometimes it is something we return to with the help of someone who truly cares.